Okay. Alright, so we're going to start off, you're going to need a screwdriver, Phillips head to get this started. One of the things that you are going to want to remember when doing this is to make sure that you discharge yourself. And you can do that by touching any part of the case that isn't painted, so none of these black areas. Make sure it's like all metal like this. Make sure you touch it with both hands, that way you get any static that might have been built up in your body to discharge before you start working on this. Okay. What I usually like to start out with is by taking apart a lot of the cables, like on the ones that are attached to the motherboard. I usually remove those first just to get them out of the way. That way, you don't have any wires tying you up. And I usually start with the hard drive because I usually get that out of the way first. It frees up a lot of space. So go ahead and make sure you grab by the black, and just pull firmly. It should pop right out. And then you go ahead and slide this forward, push the tab in, slide the whole thing forward, and you can lift up and you can completely pull it out like so. Okay. Then from here on out, we're going to go ahead and disconnect all of the other cables. Remember where these go because you will have to put them back into place. We're going to start off by removing all of these, all the little connectors that are attached for your speaker and your front ports, as well as your power cable. Those all need to come out. And like I said, I usually pull them out first because it kind of frees things up for you. So go ahead and grab them by the base and then just firmly pull up. You may have to kind of wiggle it back and forth a little bit to kind of break it free, but it will come free. You just got to kind of give it enough of a pull. Okay, so once you got all those out of the way, then go ahead and disconnect all the other ones up here, the IDE cable right here, as well as the power cable that goes from the power adapter to the motherboard itself. We want to make sure that that gets pulled out. And that actually has a little tab right here that you want to, kind of press in and hold firmly, and then it should just pull out like so. Okay, and now that we've got all the, most of the wires moved out of the way, you notice that we have more access to the RAM, which is right here. We definitely want to get those out because you're going to have to put it in the new board. Don't leave it in this board, or otherwise we'll be short RAM sticks, which is not fun. And you just lift the tabs down, or pull the tabs down on either side, and they just kind of pop out like so. And then go ahead and put those off to the side. You also want to make sure you get the CPU fan disconnected from the motherboard. Do that the same way by grabbing it and pulling it up. Like I said, remember where everything goes because this will be a test at the end of the session. Okay.
True story.
Alright, so once we get those out of the way, I usually start with the system fan. It does make a little bit more room in there, and it's easier to get the motherboard out at the end, so I usually just start by pulling that out. If you notice, there's these kind of rubber tab things that hold it into place. You can just go ahead and pull it through. It'll kind of take some wiggling, but you will be able to pop those little rubber tabs through, so just go ahead and pull that through like so. Once we get that out, then we can worry about the CPU. And like I said, make sure you unplug this before you start taking it out. You don't want to rip anything off the motherboard. Okay, now we have four screws on the CPU, heatsink, and fan, and those are going to be the 4 outside edge ones, not these ones. These ones won't get the whole thing out like you need, so you need to make sure that you go with these ones right here. So like I said, all you're going to need is a screwdriver, which I can't seem to find. There it is. And then you're going to unscrew those as such, and it should take just a couple turns off each, and you can kind of feel it sort of pop up, and that's a good sign. That means it's coming off of its mount properly. Okay, so once you get those unscrewed, it should just lift off like so. No big deal. Put that off to the side. Okay, now right here, you've got your CPU, and you're going to want to get that out so that you can put it into the new motherboard. The release for it is right here, this little lever. You kind of push it down and kind of pull it out away from that little tab that kind of holds onto it, and it should lift this free and allow you to pull the CPU out with no problems. So, well, I'm having problems because I don't feel like grabbing it like that. Okay, and go ahead and set that off to the side. Try not to get it with the little pins face down onto something because you don't want to damage those, but at the same time you don't want to get this thermal goo everywhere. So I would say like maybe grab a napkin or something and kind of set it on top of the napkin. That way you just don't get stuff everywhere. Okay, now typically in a motherboard we have up to 8 screws. This one only has 7 because it looks like one of them was missing, but you should normally have 8, and they should be towards the outside edges as well as right here, as well as these back edges right here. So go ahead and just unscrew all of those and you can pretty much pull it out. Alright. So we're going to start unscrewing these screws like so, and once we get all of those out of there, we'll be able to lift the motherboard free. Now make sure you hold on to these because they are kind of tiny, so either put them in like a little plastic bag or something, or set them off in a safe area off to the side where they're not going to get knocked or knocked over or pushed out of the way or anything like that. Okay.
Shows a nice roll label with a white circle around them.
Oh yeah. Okay, and they're also labeled, you can tell, because right here there will be that little kind of white thing around it that kind of labels that it's a screw that attaches to the case on the motherboard and not just any old random screw on there. You want to avoid going for the random screws because those may screw you up, no pun intended. Well, that one's hiding. Okay, and then so once you get all those screws out, the easiest way to pull it out is to kind of pull it this way like so, and get it separated off of these little kind of clamps and brackets that kind of hold your back ports into place. Once you get it slid out and free of that stuff, you can kind of just lift from the bottom like so and kind of just carefully pull it out. Okay, and once we've got that pulled out, you may need to check the other motherboard for this type of a bracket. If it doesn't already come pre-installed, you will need to take this one off. And the way you do that is there's these little clips that you probably can't see, but they're right in here. These little kind of blue clips underneath the metal piece that actually holds the CPU and heatsink fan on. You'll just have to pull those off and then it should just slide through and you can put it on the new motherboard. But like I said, this should come on the new motherboard, so you shouldn't have any problems there. Okay, so pretending that this is the new motherboard, we're going to go ahead and put it back in the same way. Make sure all of your ports are lined up with where they're supposed to be in the back and you should be fine. So you're going to just kind of slide that front end down just like so. Set the back side in there nice and slowly. Make sure it's free of anything that it might be caught up on, and then make sure that you line up those ports like I said, and it should just kind of push into place like so. And you'll know because you'll see all the little screw holes for where the case meets the motherboard, and that's where you hit those 8 screws back in. Okay, so now that we kind of got this slipped back into place and it looks like all the brackets are properly attached and where they need to be, we can go ahead and start screwing all those 8 screws back in. So go ahead and so now that we've got all 8 screws back in, or 7 in this case because we didn't have the 8th, I usually go ahead and put in things like your RAM now. So go ahead and grab that. Make sure that the holes line up, your little notches here line up with where the notch should be on the board itself. Otherwise, you'll run into issues with snapping the RAM, which is not good. Okay, so the way you do that is you've got the hole lined up like so. You're going to just slip it into both ends like that, and then go ahead and with 2 fingers just kind of firmly push down until you hear it snap into place. You may have to lift these up just to kind of lock it down, but it usually will kind of lock itself as you firmly apply pressure. So we'll go ahead and do that again with the next one, and we'll do it the same way, slip it into both slots, and then go ahead and push down firmly. And like I said, both locks kind of lock it into place. Now, next is going to be the CPU, which we set off to the side. You're going to want to make sure that you line it up the way it's supposed to go. Now if you notice, I don't know if you can see this, but there are 2 notches, one on each side, and they actually correspond with the notches that are on your CPU right here. That's how you know where the first pin is. Also, the first pin is directed by this little arrow right here, so you can always tell where it's supposed to go. So we'll go ahead and just set that in there. That doesn't need to be pushed down or anything like that. You can pretty much just set it in there and it's good to go. Okay, and next we're going to go ahead and lock that down by dropping that down and then pulling this arm down like so, and you'll feel kind of, you know, some pressure pushing back on you, and that's okay. You want that. That's how you know that it's, you know, firmly seated in there. And like I said, just push this down and make sure it locks underneath that tab like so. Okay, now we can go ahead and put the CPU and heatsink fan back on. And the way you're going to do that is make sure that, you know, your cable is hooked up to the area where it needs to be plugged into, which in this case is right here. Make sure that that's, you know, close to that area, and you don't have it like over here and then going, oh, well, where can I plug it in? You know, think about that beforehand. That way you don't, you know, run into a pickle there. Okay, and the way this goes in there is it's just going to kind of line up with the 4 holes that you've got from the heatsink CPU fan bracket, which is behind the motherboard. Now, they may not slip directly into those holes right away. Sometimes it takes a little bit of, you know, kind of pressure to get them down in there and started threading into that hole itself. So just, you can kind of apply a little bit of pressure with your screwdriver until you kind of feel it hit and lock in there. And once that happens, you just kind of screw it until it's hand tight and call it good. So we'll go ahead and we'll hit those 4 screws real quick. And like I said, don't be afraid to give it a little bit of pressure. It's not going to break it, and you need to make sure that those are seated down on there properly. Okay, so now that that's hand tight, we'll go ahead and plug it back into where we unplugged it from originally, which was right here. And to do that, just kind of line up the holes and then push in there until it's seated down in there just right. Okay, now what we're going to do now is we're going to plug all of our front ports, our speaker, and our power cables back in. And like I said, you needed to kind of remember where those go, because, you know, they will have kind of coordinated areas for where they're supposed to be plugged in. Okay, this one goes to the farthest one out here. Should be a little orange colored. Should be a little orange colored one that should sit back towards the back like that. Okay. Next one is going to be this little yellow one. Some of them are kind of color coordinated, so it'll make it a little bit easier to remember. Some of them are a little bit different colors than what they should match with. Okay, so this is our speaker. It's a little 2-pronged one that's going to go right next to this one right here. We'll go ahead and plug those in. Now be careful, because those pins are, you know, they're really thin metal, really small, and they can get bent out of place easily. Which is not good, so make sure you don't pull them at weird angles or anything like that, so that, you know, they slide back in there straight like they're supposed to. And last but not least, we've got our power cable for our front power button, and that's just going to go into that first. Okay, and now that we've got you know, all these connections put back in, the ones down at the bottom right here, once all those are back in, the last couple that you need to make sure get in are the IDE cable, as well as the power cable for the actual motherboard itself from the power supply. The power supply adapter for the motherboard looks like this one right here, so you're going to need to plug that one back into the slot that it was in before. Now remember, that was the one that had the clamp on it right here, so you're going to need to make sure that that clip goes back into place. And the way you put this in is you just kind of line those holes up like so, and then give it a good push, a good firm push down, and you should feel it kind of, you know, snap into place. Once that's in there, make sure you get the IDE cable back in there, which is the blue one right here. And remember, you know, it's blue, color coordinated with blue, as well as notch, so it's kind of hard to, you know, screw that one up there or not get that in there right. So remember, that's going to be the IDE cable right there, as well as this one right here. And we're just going to do the same thing, kind of line up with those holes like so, and then firmly push down. Okay, now that pretty much just leaves the hard drive. Okay, so last we have our hard drive. Couple things you want to look at here are this notch here and this notch here. Those are going to be the 2 notches that are actually going to line back up into place right here and right here. So it's going to, you know, like we pulled it out, it's going to kind of, you know, slide back in there just in the pattern that you're seeing right there. So make sure you do line up those 2 holes when you slide it back in the way. And also make sure that any cables that you have down here are kind of, you know, pushed out of the way, because you don't want any of those to kind of get in your way, as seeing as how, you know, the hard drive is kind of bulky and is going to take up a bit of room. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and slide that back into place. So pick this up, We'll line it up. Okay, so once we've got that lined up into place, it should just slide down like so. Make sure that there's nothing kind of, like I said, any cabling obstructing it or anything like that. We're just going to kind of push in this tab and give it a firm push in. Make sure all the little tabs are lined up properly, and you should kind of hear it lock into place like you just did. Okay, and once that's done, you've got your last two cables that you need to plug in. That would be this SATA cable right here, as well as your power connector, which is this little black one right here. Once we get those plugged in, we should be good to go. Okay, so now that we've got those plugged in, all you really need to do is put the case cover back on it, and you've got yourself a replaced motherboard.